It was the quietest morning I had ever known. And I mean quiet in a way that hurts. You know, the kind of silence a house makes when the person who filled it with noise is gone. The date was October 12th, our anniversary. 10 years since we stood under that old oak tree and made our promises. And exactly 11 months since Mark died. I was sitting in his chair. I still sit in his chair. It has this permanent dent where he always rested his head. I was just staring at the calendar, just waiting for the day to be over. It was barely 9 a.m. I had already cried, had already remembered everything. I'd already accepted that this day was going to be the worst day of my life, a second time. Then I heard it, a knock at the door. Not a polite little tap, a solid, firm delivery knock. I didn't order anything. I hadn't opened a bill in a week. I knew who it was, of course. My mother, maybe, or Mark's sister, coming to bring me coffee or say some kind words that wouldn't actually help. I pulled myself up, dragging my robe behind me, and shuffled to the front door. I looked through the peephole. It wasn't family. It was a young man in a floral delivery uniform. He was holding a huge bouquet, red roses, maybe 24. I opened the door, just a crack. "I'm sorry? I think you have the wrong house." He just smiled, a practiced, professional smile. "Sarah Jenkins?" he asked. Signed Mark Jenkins. Happy 10th. I froze. My breath just stopped in my lungs. I felt the blood rush out of my face so fast I thought I might faint right there on the welcome mat. "No," I whispered. That's impossible. Mark died almost a year ago." The kid looked confused. His smile faded. He checked the little card on the bouquet, tilting his head. "Ma'am, the order was placed and paid for. Very, very specifically. And the card is right here. Says, 'Happy 10th. I kept my promise, love. Look for the next one, M.'" He pushed the flowers into my arms. They were heavy. They smelled of cold air and deep, sweet life. I took them, numbly, and just stood there as he hurried back to his van. I received flowers from my late husband on our anniversary. And in that moment, I realized my day wasn't going to be silent. It was going to be a mystery, a massive, emotional mystery that only Mark could have set in motion. And I knew, right then, I had to figure out how he did it. This wasn't just a gift. This was a message. And I was going to follow it all the way to the end. The roses sat on the kitchen counter. I couldn't bring myself to put them in water. It felt too final, too much like admitting they were real. I picked up the little card again. Happy 10th. I kept my promise, love. Look for the next one, M. Mark hated red roses. I mean, he hated them. He said they were a cliché. Our wedding flowers were white lilies and blue hydrangeas. He always bought me daisies or tulips. Red roses? Never. This was the first clue. It wasn't just a general, prearranged gift. It was a specific choice, and it was a choice that meant something only to us. I walked over to the old photo album, the one we kept on the lowest shelf filled with blurry pictures from college. I flipped through the pages until I found a photo of us standing next to a flower stall in a farmer's market. We were 19. That day, he was broke. I was broke. We were looking at a stunning bouquet of red roses, the kind that were too perfect to be real. I sighed, dramatically, and said, "If I ever get red roses from you, Mark, I'm going to know you finally won the lottery." He laughed, a huge, rolling sound that I could still hear in my head. He leaned down and whispered in my ear, "I will get you red roses, Sarah, on our 10th anniversary, to remind you that I still want to win the lottery for you, even if all I have to offer is a cheap six-pack." The 10-year anniversary. He was reminding me of a conversation we had a decade ago when we had nothing but hope and cheap coffee. He had kept that promise. But the real mystery was the next line. Look for the next one. The next what? The next card? The next delivery? I started tearing the house apart. It wasn't a search. It was a desperate, energized frenzy. I looked in all the usual spots, the sock drawer, the junk drawer, his bedside table, nothing. Then I focused on the objects that had a connection to Mark's planning. Mark was a detail man. He made lists for everything. Where did he keep his most important secret list? I remembered his old leather briefcase, the one he used for his first job, the one he said smelled like ambition and stale biscuits. It was stored in the hall closet. I pulled it out. It was dusty. I opened it. Inside, it wasn't empty. It held 3 things: a worn copy of our wedding vows, a small, sealed glass jar full of the sand we collected on our honeymoon in Maine, and an envelope. It was thick, heavy, and written in Mark's unmistakable, slightly messy handwriting, to be opened on the day of the red roses. My hands were shaking so hard, I almost dropped the jar of sand. I held that envelope for a full minute, just feeling the paper, the imprint of his pen. It was the closest I had been to him in 11 months. I tore it open. Inside wasn't a note. It was a receipt. An old, crinkled, almost faded receipt from a tiny hardware store called the Gaffer's Corner, near his old office. Underneath the receipt, a line was circled in red ink. It read, Item 4, Small Safety Deposit Box Rental, 1 year prepaid. Underneath it, in Mark's handwriting, he had scrawled one word, key. The next one wasn't a flower. It was the key. He had used the promise of the red roses to start a whole scavenger hunt for me from beyond the grave. And I realized right then that the true story wasn't about the flowers. It was about the time Mark spent planning for my future without him. The next day, I called the bank. I found out where the Gaffer's Corner was, and it was near a branch of the old City Reserve Bank. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. I put on my best black dress, tucked the small key and the flowered receipt into my purse, and I drove downtown. The bank was cold and echoey, the kind of place that smells like money and old paper. The clerk was a serious-looking man in a stiff suit. I need to access a small safe deposit box, I told him, trying to keep my voice steady. Box 412. It was rented under the name Mark Jenkins. I showed him the key. I showed him Mark's death certificate. I showed him our marriage license. It took over an hour, but finally he led me down to the vault. It was silent down there. Just rows and rows of metal boxes. The clerk slid the key in, and there was a soft clink. He pulled out the box and handed it to me. I carried it into a tiny private room, closed the door, and set the metal box on the small table. It was heavy. My hands were shaking again, but this time it was from dread. What if this was the end? What if it was just a will? I lifted the lid. It wasn't a will. It was Mark. Inside the box, there were 3 things. First, a thick file folder labeled The Next 3 Years. Second, a new, brand new, expensive-looking gold necklace with a simple moon-shaped pendant. And third, a small flash drive tucked inside a card that simply read, Play Me. I ignored the file and the necklace. I went straight for the flash drive. I pulled out my phone, found the adapter in my purse, and plugged it in. The screen lit up. It was a video file. I pressed play.
It was Mark. He was wearing the old blue sweater I gave him 3 Christmases ago. He was sitting in his chair, the same one I was sitting in when the roses arrived. He looked thinner, but he was smiling. That slightly crooked, full of secret smile.
He spoke softly, his voice a little rougher than I remembered. Hey, Sarah, if you're watching this, you found the key. And the red roses arrived. Happy 10th, my love. I'm sorry I can't be there to take you out to that terrible Italian place we love. He paused, and his eyes got watery. I felt the tears rolling down my own cheeks now. This was real. This was him. I know this past year has been awful. I know. And I hate that I left you to handle all the quiet. But I didn't leave you empty-handed. Remember that trip we planned to see the Northern Lights? We kept putting it off. Well, I stopped putting things off a while ago. The file you found? The one that says the next 3 years? He lifted his hand and pointed to the box I had just opened. That's a prepaid package. The full cost of a trip to Norway. The dates are there. 3 years from now, when the anniversary feels a little less raw, I wanted you to have something to look forward to, something big, when the grief has finally started to make some room for joy. I was openly sobbing now. He had planned something for 3 years in the future. He paused, adjusting his sweater. The necklace, he said, nodding toward the gold pendant. You always wanted that moon necklace. I knew you wouldn't buy it for yourself. So you have it now. Wear it. Wear it and remember that you are the light in my darkness. You always were. He took a deep breath. This part was clearly hard for him. But listen to me, Sarah. This is the most important part of this whole crazy operation. When I got sick, really sick, I had 2 fears. The first was leaving you. The second was that you would stop living for yourself because you were still living for me. Don't do that. Don't become a ghost in this beautiful house. The flowers, the key, the trip, it's all just structure. It's just me giving you one last itinerary, but you're free to rewrite it. You're free to sell the ticket. You're free to take someone else on that trip. I'm serious. If you find someone who makes you laugh that terrible, loud laugh that I love, then take them. You deserve to be happy. Don't wait for my permission. This is me giving it to you right now. He gave a final, shaky smile. I love you, Sarah. Always. Now go put some water on those terrible red roses. They're a symbol of hope, you know. I hope you find yours. The video ended. I stayed in that little room for an hour, the vault key still cool in my hand. I reread the entire file Mark had left for me. The file wasn't just a travel itinerary. It was a full account of his last year. It detailed his meetings with his lawyer, his talks with the florist, a special contract he had arranged to pay for 4 straight years of anniversary flowers, and the exact steps he took to set up the safe deposit box a month before he passed. He had been planning his final gifts while he was fighting his illness, while I was focused on bringing him soup and making sure he was comfortable. He was spending his precious few good hours organizing his exit so that my landing would be as soft as possible. But one thing still didn't make sense. The delivery man said the note mentioned one promise, the 10th anniversary. But Mark's planning file was extensive. It was a 4-year plan. I drove back home, the gold moon necklace now warm against my chest. I rushed to the kitchen, grabbed the red roses, and finally put them in water. They looked stunning. They looked like a promise fulfilled. I looked at the note one last time. Happy 10th. I kept my promise, love. Look for the next one. M. I was looking at the flowers, the key, the trip. But what was the next one? The next step in the plan? I went back to the old leather briefcase, Mark's storage spot. I opened it again just in case I had missed something. And I had. I reached deep inside the briefcase's lining where the fabric was slightly torn. I felt a small, flat piece of plastic. I pulled it out. It was a small plastic tag, the kind you get at a tailor. It had a number, 42. I frowned. What was 42? It wasn't a bank number. It wasn't a date. Then I looked at Mark's favorite suit, the charcoal gray one he wore for every important meeting and the one he wore when he proposed. It was hanging in the closet. I pulled it out. Sure enough, right on the inside jacket pocket, a small white ticket was hanging from the sleeve. It was a dry cleaning receipt. The ticket number? 42. He didn't just pre-plan the gifts. He was setting me up to clean out his old life, piece by piece, so I wouldn't have to do it all at once in a massive wave of grief. I drove to the tailor, a grumpy old man named Mr. Chin who always pretended he didn't remember us. I walked in and handed him the ticket. I'm here to pick up ticket 42. He shuffled to the back and came out with a small, flat package wrapped in brown paper. This one is special. Your husband, he came in a month before He paid me extra to hold this, said I was not to give it to anyone but the woman with the tiny key. I opened the brown paper. Inside was a single blue shirt, Mark's favorite, the one he wore on our first date. It was perfectly pressed, and tucked inside the collar was a small, single, black cassette tape. A cassette tape! He was a creature of the 90s. He still had a beat-up old tape deck in the garage. I drove home like a maniac, ran to the garage, and plugged in the old tape deck. I slided the cassette inside. It whirred, then clicked. And then a song started to play. It wasn't a recording of his voice. It was our song, the one that played as we walked down the aisle at our wedding, In My Life by the Beatles. I sat on the cold concrete floor of the garage, surrounded by his tools and his sawdust, and I listened. I listened to the song we shared, and I cried until I had no tears left. When the song ended, there was a quiet click, and then Mark's voice came through the speakers, clear, calm, and present. Okay, Sarah, if you're hearing this, it means you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing, cleaning up the mess I left behind. I'm proud of you. I knew you would follow the instructions. But here's the final note, my love, the last instruction. His voice grew softer, like he was whispering directly to me. There's something I want you to remember about those red roses, the ones that started all this fuss. You remember the joke, right? The lottery? That you'd only get red roses when I won the lottery? Well, look closer at the note the delivery man gave you. You know how I always wrote my capital M's with two peaks, but sometimes they look like an upside-down W? The note didn't say, look for the next one M. It said, look for the next one W. But I meant it to be a secret. I wanted it to look like my signature. The W stands for the wall. The wall. Not a wall in the house. The wall. Our wall. I knew exactly what he meant. When we bought the house, there was a terrible, ugly, blank wall in the master bedroom. It was too wide, too high, and it just made the room feel heavy. I had wanted to tear it down. Mark, the engineer, said, "No, we don't knock it down, we make it our foundation. We fill it with our memories." We had spent weeks covering that wall with framed photos of our life together. The wedding, the holidays, the blurry college pictures, the terrible family portraits. It was the wall of our lives. I stood in front of it now, the tape deck quiet in my hand. I looked at the photos. They weren't just pictures. They were a map. I started at the top left, the oldest picture, a photo of us on our first date wearing ridiculous oversized sweaters. I ran my hand down the photo rail, searching. I remembered Mark's words. The W is for the wall. I pulled the frame off the wall. The back was just cardboard. Nothing. I pulled off the second one. Nothing. The third, the fourth. Then I reached the fifth photo. It was a picture from our trip to Scotland, where he wore a kilt and looked very uncomfortable. The frame was slightly acrayed. I lifted it off the wall. And there, right on the dry white paint underneath the photo, was a final inscription. Written not in pen, but carved lightly into the plaster, in Mark's handwriting. You found me. Now be free. Love forever. And under the message, taped flat to the wall, was a simple folded white cloth. I peeled it off. It was a pair of silver dog tags, the kind he wore when he was younger, before he met me. They were cold, heavy, and tied around the chain was a tiny, worn wedding band, my first wedding ring, the one I thought I had lost years ago on a picnic. I held the dog tags and the ring in my hands and realized the profound meaning of his final gesture. He didn't just want me to have a fun trip or a nice necklace. He was returning the most important piece of my past, the first ring, the symbol of the promise he made 10 years ago, and pairing it with the symbol of his physical identity, the dog tags. He was giving me permission to bury him, to let go of the physical memory, and to wear the memory of our first pure promise as I went forward. The red roses were the flash. The key was the structure. The whole plan was his final promise. I put the dog tags back on the wall behind the crooked picture of him in the kilt. I put the original worn wedding band on my right hand. I put the beautiful gold moon necklace on my neck. I looked at the beautiful red roses blooming in my kitchen. They were no longer a symbol of grief, but a symbol of hope. A hope he paid for, planned for, and wrapped up in a complicated series of steps to ensure that I would spend my anniversary not crying, but searching for him and finding myself. I walked to the filing cabinet and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. I didn't start a new will. I started a new list, a list of things to do. Learn Norwegian, buy a warmer coat, call Mom. I received flowers from my late husband on our anniversary.